Hello everybody, my name is Mara Floss. I'm a medical student from Brazil and we are here for our 12th Rural Family Medicine Café. I'm really happy to be here. This one will be about environment and climate change in rural areas, the influence that we have in the people and what are our experience, and I hope we could have a good cafe. So I will start with Ewing to present yourself, and then we can go after with Bianca and Amber.
Hi everybody, my name's Ewan. I'm a doctor in Queensland, Australia, president of the Rural Doctors in Australia. Very interested in climate change and wanting to hear from you all about your experience in your own countries and about what you think the, I guess, the opportunities and problems are in the future.
Bianca?
Yes. So, hello everyone. My name is Bianca. I'm a medical student. I'm in my 4th year now, preparing myself to my internship. And I have participated of some cafes from now, and I am really interested about this one because I do believe that climate change is really important. And I was really happy and excited when I saw that this subject was a subject that people talked about during the Olympic in Rio. We had some presentation, and they had some arts and artistic presentation about climate change, and it was really interesting. So happy to be here.
Amber?
Hello, my name is Amber. I am a now final year medical student at Swansea University. I'm originally from the Virgin Islands, which is sort of where my interest in rural medicine started. I'm very interested in climate change from the perspective of health professionals because I feel it has such a great impact on our population, and doctors as advocates need to take up their role in leadership in bringing about the changes that we need to help improve the effect that humans are having on our planet. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, very good. I think we need to think, just to introduce, I was reading a little bit about the climate change and everything, and we know that the climate is changing a lot, and it's the weather conditions and its intensity, and we are getting a warm planet, and sometimes media wouldn't like to talk about it, or not all the aspects. Here in Brazil even we have recently a huge disaster that people do not know, the Mariana disaster. So I think we have a lot of to talk and discuss. So I'm not sure if anyone would like to bring anything to start, or can I ask, like, personally for each one of you, like, what do you think, and what do you think that it will be good to bring today, like? You mean?
Yes, I think from a personal perspective, my own town has had 2 major weather events in the last 5 to 6 years, where a massive rainfall has caused major flooding of over 80% of the town. And this has led to obvious economic disadvantage for people whose houses have been ruined, financial and industry disadvantage because of industry being destroyed or being unable to be operating, and farmers and cattle owners not being able to be productive. So I guess the economic impacts and the personal social impacts of climate change are becoming more and more prominent, and we certainly expect that in the next 100 years we'll see between a 2 and 6 degrees increase in temperature. What the implications too are for people is obviously their health and well-being, food production, the also health, particularly exotic disease. So during the weather events, we saw some cases of melioidosis, which is an uncommon soil bacteria that only lives normally in the Northern Territory and Thailand and some other countries. But with the weather event, the bacteria came down with the floodwaters. So seeing exotic disease and also mosquito-borne disease becoming more common. So we, apart from the major weather events where we see floods and cyclones, which we're seeing become more common on the northern eastern part of Australia, we also see drought, and in recent times we've seen the desert come 200, 300, 400 kilometres closer to the coast, with consequent effects on local wildlife, kangaroos and other animals as well. So certainly Australia has sort of significant risks with climate change, and we are seeing that. The challenge, as always, is motivating the politicians, I guess, to acknowledge the issue. We do have certain things in place that the government has put in place, such as putting solar panels on roofs to generate electricity rather than relying on coal-fired power stations. Australia has no nuclear power stations. Also, I guess trying to shift to cars which consume are more fuel efficient, which Australia being a very big country, we use a lot of fossil fuels moving around. So quite a lot of challenges for Australia, both as a doctor and a GP for my patients, for communities because of the massive economic and financial problems that can occur, and for government in putting in place policies and opportunities to address climate change. I think these are all major issues.
Sure. Yeah, very good overview. I also would like to bring to what you say, the raise of mental illness when the crops do not grow well, when the things that directly affect the rural areas, the heating, that it's becoming warm and this change everything, and could increase the depression, all the diseases and difficulties with alcohol and people. It changes all the constants of working in a rural area. Just to add more, Amber, Bianca would like to talk anything?
Yeah, I don't mind adding. So what I'll do is I'll talk a bit about my experience in the Beaver and then in Wales, because they have two slightly different problems just because of the geography. So in the BVI, our main sort of weather disaster that's been affected by climate change are hurricanes. And the way it's changed is that the normal season for hurricanes has shifted completely. So hurricane season used to be from sort of June to November, but now it's lengthened from as early as May to November. We're seeing hurricanes, and they're huge hurricanes. And the problem that shows is that the area is getting warmer for a lot longer. So what that means is mosquitoes can breed for a lot longer period of time, so that the population is more exposed to mosquito-carried diseases, particularly Zika, which right now is sort of an unknown in the future, with pregnant women. And also more people are being affected by the heat. So obviously in the Caribbean it's hot, but it's hotter now than most people are used to. And that particularly affects elderly people and very young people. The knock-on effect that this has is that our healthcare system isn't really used to seeing heat stroke. Like, we get patients who are tourists, who aren't used to the heat anyway, who come in being affected by it. But when it's sort of people who live in the community, it's sort of, okay, this is a bit strange, what do we do now? Sort of thing, and we're seeing it more often. And I think one of the big things for me anyway in my country is that because we're not a very agriculture heavy country, a lot of people don't seem to really notice that climate change is happening. And I remember maybe 3 or 4 years ago, my parents live on a beach basically, and there was this massive algae bloom, and I mean like the whole beach was absolutely covered in this rotten sargassum. And I had told my dad in 2008 that that was going to happen, and this was like 2014, 15 that it was happening, and he was like, "So how is it happening?" I was like, "Oh, you remember like a few years ago that I told you about the climate change and what it would do to the algae?" And he like in his mind he totally couldn't put two and two together. And I think that that's a problem that everyone in the population has. A lot of people who aren't keeping up to date with climate change can't put together the facts that scientists are presenting to them or things that they're hearing on the news with things that they're seeing around them, especially as I said, because we don't do a lot of agriculture. They don't see the crops not growing as well or the fruit not being as nutritious or things taking a lot more energy to farm. So they don't make the connection. In Wales, their main issue is flooding. So Wales is known for being one of the wettest places on earth, so it rains a lot no matter what season it is. I always tell people the rain here has no respect for season boundaries. So flooding has always been a problem, but now it's almost as if every time it rains, it floods. And they've tried fixing the drainage system, and that's helped a little bit. But the whole fact is that because it's warmer, instead of having snow in sort of the winter time, we're getting more rain because it's not cold enough for the ice to form. The other problem that they're having is because Wales has a lot of agriculture, they have a lot of open plains, they're seeing more wildfires. Now, the fires tend to be set by people in the community, but because there's so much dry plants and grass and stuff, the wildfires are now becoming more out of control than they used to be previously. But the people in the city don't see that. So the people, as Maya is saying, the rural community is the one that's most affected by climate change because they're the ones who are seeing it firsthand. The people in the city aren't seeing anything. They're just seeing the price of their food get more and more expensive. But they put that down to inflation and not the fact that actually it's becoming harder and harder for farmers to grow their crops and take care of their animals. Yeah, that's all I have to add from my experience.
Sure. Just also, yeah, you can go, Bianca, after that.
Okay. Actually, I don't know really to have any specific experience that I would like to tell, but my personal view is that I have a really big worry about water, especially because firstly, people, I don't know, but in my personal view, people don't realize that the water that we can drink is actually going to end sometime because the way that things are going, it's not sustainable. And the other point that it's really scary for me is the fact that we have our oceans level increasing, and especially here in Brazil that we have a absolutely huge coast, and all our big cities they are in beaches, and especially here in Porto Alegre, the city where I live, we have the center of our city is known to be as a port, and it's really scary to think that if the levels continue increasing, we won't have any place to go. It's going to the water is going to hit everyone in every big city and Rio de Janeiro and other big cities. So it's really scary for me. I think that today I'm here more to listen than to say something because I do believe that I have lots to learn about this subject, but I have to say that I'm really scary and I'm willing to learn with you guys how I can do something or modify something or make people realize that we have to do something and that we are responsible for all that's happening now. So let's help ourselves.
I would like to add some things still. I think we have a huge problem with malnutrition also if you don't grow the crops like Amber was saying, and if you have less crops and an industry that don't care about people and care about money, and this is like growing, and the access to clean water is becoming difficult in the last years, and the floodings come with this. And I think also I would like to bring the remote and Aboriginal people. It's much more vulnerable because they depend directly of it, so it is harder to think about it, and they are suffering, as an example, much more by with diarrhea. You know, like this because bacteria are getting heat. It's more warm, so you have bacteria during for more time, and like mosquitoes, as Amber saying. And I think also that people that live in a urban area and even work in a urban area receive water directly by a tap water, and then you receive your garbage go just with a truck, and you don't see what you produce with garbage. You usually, if you have a warm climate, you just put an air conditioner, and then it doesn't affect you as much as affect in someone that's working into the land and working producing crops and everything. It doesn't affect you if you buy your foods in a market, supermarket or wherever. Doesn't affect as much as affect directly who is producing it and it's being affected. So I'm not sure where do you like to start with all these things, because it's a lot of things to discuss and it's really important. Go, Will.
I might I'll just add some comments. I've been in Norway in Tromsø for 2 days, attending a rural research working group, and it's the problems of climate change worldwide, and even obviously in a very northern country, quite the opposite end of the earth to my own country, seeing the Arctic ice melting, that seawater levels rising, affecting, and climate change affecting the health of communities and also the ecosystems, so polar bears and other animals and seals, their population density changing. What I think is important to talk about is the role that rural doctors and rural people have in providing evidence of change. I think we need to link, and you've all mentioned the fact that climate change leads to economic impacts which affect productivity as well as health. But we need the evidence to be able to take that to policymakers to demonstrate the case for change. And I think that's always the challenge, that when we see these things happening in our communities, but we don't know how to take the message, what do we measure, how do we measure it, how do we present it, and how do we take it to policymakers? Because if you can present a clear argument for a case for change, then I think most policymakers and people in power would accept that they need to do things for their community. So that's the challenge, and I think it's having the evidence and being able to present that evidence articulately, and that's why Rural Medicine Cafe like this is so important, to think about how you might get that information, how would you measure it, how would you present it to people, and who would you tell? Do you go to the media? Do you go to your local community? Do you go to your local politician who might represent you? So I think that there's some thoughts about that. One more comment I have, and that's about particularly for Australia, is in the north we have the small Polynesian islands, and we already are seeing some of those islands having to move their populations because the islands are going underwater and having to move their towns, having to move their burial sites, having to move whole communities to higher ground because of global warming. But because these are not in the eye of the public, it's very hard to get people to care. There is some work being done by an Australian doctor called Lachlan McIver, who's in Geneva now, and he's done a lot of work with global warming and climate change effect in the Polynesian islands to the north of Australia. And it's possible to reference some of his work and to see how he's presented that information. And Mayara, you'll meet Lachlan when you come to Australia next year. That'd be a great opportunity. But how would you measure the effect of climate change in your communities and in the people you're working with? How would you get that information? Who would you tell about it?
Anyone would like to comment?
I can add to that.
Okay.
So in the Virgin Islands, you're meant to report any sort of issue to the I can't remember what they're called, the Department of Disaster Management and Preparedness. So sort of the issues that we get as a result of hurricanes, for example, right now the issue with managing the mosquito population with Zika, it's not done just by the health service, it's done by the Department of Disaster Management and Preparedness. There's also a Department of Fisheries, which is meant to deal purely with issues surrounding the coastline and the water. So for example, if there were ever a problem with pollution of the sea, or there was an incident where dead fish were starting to come up on the beach, so technically they're the ones who are supposed to be put in contact with that. However, if it's something that is affecting health, the ball sort of drops there. It's like you tell them and then they say thanks for the information, but it doesn't really go anywhere. So I think for the BVI, that's sort of the next step in terms of what we're going to do about climate change. It's all well and good to have a department that you can refer to and people who are willing to collect the data, but there is no liaison between those departments and the health service and the doctors that work within the health service. There's no game plan of what to do. For example, if there were a hurricane that resulted in catastrophic flooding and people were displaced and injured, there's not really a pathway. You just kind of have to know the right person to call, and that's a bit worrying sometimes, but knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet, so hopefully we'll be okay.
Just to add, like last year here in Brazil, we had 2 cyclones, and huge ones. Like even my family in the rural area have part of their house destroyed, and they do not know. We don't have shelters. We don't have this culture in Brazil. We are not prepared for floods, for natural disasters. Even if for the last 10 years we have a huge flood every year, we are not ready for that. And rural areas are more the isolation and all the burden that affects the health. It gets worse when we are thinking and talking about rural areas. So it's very hard to be in a country like Brazil and being vulnerable to natural disasters that are coming more frequently. And we even, like here, we don't have, even in school, what you do if it's a hurricane coming, where do you run, and then what do you do? Do you enter in your car? Do you stay out? And I know that like Europe and other places have much better, people have a better idea of that. And we even have this into school, so people do not know. So then the health service get a much more important, like it's an important place to discuss it, and in the rural areas to discuss it with people by people, to explain and bring and address directly the what's happening. And it's interesting. I mean, like, how can we measure that? I really don't know how I can say objectively, but if you get the subjective, like people are suffering, they know that's changing. Like if you talk with any person with more than 40 years, they will say it was different in the past, and they will explain you. I ask it sometimes, and they will explain that the crops grow much better. We have seasons that are more limited. We have less. We have the not the right, but the enough amount of rain. Like my state stayed in the west, stayed almost 2 months without any rain, and then it destroyed all the local producers. So who had get the advantage of that? Who has a monoculture in Brazil and have a huge place to plant, and then after that the soil is drained, they just choose another place to explore and to cut down the trees and destroy another part, and then they put coals in there, and they just do a cycle of destruction. And I listened a poem from a friend that he said, uh, it's not the humans that are destroying the nature, the earth. It is the earth that destroying the humans to survive, because the humans just earth is just tired of humans. And I was just thinking that in some ways we are not seeing that, but maybe it's another perspective. I don't know if anyone would like to add.
I just would like to say that I agree with you that people see that the climate is changing. But the problem is that I think that people don't realize what is the significance of it. You know what I mean? I think that it's a good question how to measure this, and maybe having more studies and evidences about this changing. But I think that we should have some way, or maybe I don't know how, but we should think how we could make people realize how bad are things, because it's just like you said, Maya. Here in Brazil, we are not prepared for any disaster, but sometimes it happens 2 or 3 or 4 years again and again and again, and we still are not prepared, because I believe that people see that it's not okay, but they just organize things after the disaster happened, but they don't realize that we have to do a bigger difference, and that probably we will have more problems in the future and bigger problems. So I think the problem is how to move people to realize that.
How to create awareness regarding climate change. Like, even if we know, knowledge it doesn't mean action. So not necessarily means action.
Exactly, that's what I meant. Perfect.
Anyone would like to comment? Amber, Ellen. I can bring more things. We had a huge discussion, not a huge, but a good discussion on Wonka Working Party, Rural Wonka Working Party, regarding the meal consumption, the meat consumption, and I think it is something that we can bring here. It's a tough topic, but anyway, we need to discuss it. It is being discussed, so. So I don't know what's your opinion about it, or if you like to run away of the topic, or I don't know. Maybe Amber.
What do you mean about reducing the amount of meat consumption and I guess having more plant consumption? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
To address climate change, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the lines of that you could do more individually your change individually. Maybe Amber would like to talk. Yeah, Ewing before. Yes.
No, I'm fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, Amber.
Yeah, to sort of link both what you and Bianca said, it's a lot. I think the whole thing about getting the population as a whole to kind of sign up to this idea of climate change and have a significant impact on trying to reduce it or to stop it is sort of, it's all about connecting the dots. So like the story that I told about my dad not connecting the heat with the sargassum bloom that we had, and not connecting the fact that although it's gone now, it's going to come back with a vengeance because it's warmer even more now than it was when it first happened. It's because in his mind those two things aren't connected. So like you were saying about meat consumption, yesterday we had a lecture at my university about sustainability, climate change, and health, given by a representative from the Welsh Department of Public Health, the Environmental Division, which is quite small, but I'm quite happy that Wales has one. And all he said was benefit for the patient, better diet, better for the environment, better consumption. And I was like, what do you mean by having a better diet? How does that equal to helping with climate change? But as Mayara said, a lot of people don't know that the dairy industry and sort of these massive agricultural companies that produce the grass that the cows are fed on or whatever actually use a significantly larger proportion of water to people who are sort of growing regular crops. Those two things don't ever connect in people's minds. They, like, for example, in Wales, the price of milk went up, and all people said is, oh, the farmers are greedy. They didn't put the connection to the fact that, oh, there's less water, so they're paying more for the water to take care of the cows, and that's why the milk is more expensive. That chain of thought never happened because people don't know sort of the backstory to it. So the thing with meat consumption, because I recently went vegan, it's been a month now, and when I went home, my parents at no end stopped questioning me, why are you doing this? So why are you doing this? You're not fat, why are you doing this? And I'm like, it's not about weight or health or anything like that. It's because, you know, there's this documentary called Cowspiracy. This guy found evidence to show that the dairy industry actually produces much more carbon emissions than planes or cars or any sort of combustion engine vehicles or machines. But nobody knows that because the information is not freely available. And one thing I found quite shocking was that he went around to all of these companies that their entire purpose is about climate change and helping to stop climate change. And only one of them had the guts to say, oh yeah, actually it is the dairy industry, but we're not allowed to talk about it. And I think that's kind of the problem, the fact that, you know, people can't really see what is behind the things that are necessary to help prevent climate change. And I was going to say something else and I forgot what it was. It'll come back to me later. But yeah, that's kind of the basis of what I want to say. Is a lot of people are being told things like, you know, you should have quick showers, a shower is better than a bath, all of this stuff, but they don't really understand the reason behind it.
I think one of the real challenges is when you've got people who depend upon, obviously their livelihood depends upon the products which directly relate to aggravation of climate change. So Australia is basically an export nation. It derives most of its income from the export of coal and meat and other commodities. So when you obviously look at the pressing need to develop more renewable energy sources, so things like wind and solar, still the major income earner for our country is things like coal and non-renewables such as natural gas, and that's a real challenge because you've got a community which really depends upon it. Meat, and particularly red meat, is again a major part of our commodity and our export to a lot of countries in the region, so a lot of Pacific countries do rely on meat exports, so Malaysia, Indonesia, and even as far afield as the Middle East as well. And so yeah, major problems in challenging that, and you've really got to make a strong case. And there's a lot of barriers, a lot of interest groups, which will make it very difficult. So it comes back to just chipping away, and I think you're right. I think it just has to be personal. It's one by one. So as you're sitting in your doctor's surgery or with your health worker, or with your patient or your community, it's about just talking to that one person. Because often, if you try and tell a government that they should stop exporting coal, it's just not going to happen. But if over time people make small incremental changes, that can be quite powerful. But doctors, and particularly rural doctors, are in a very enviable position in as much as we can influence people subtly over time, and that's one of our really important roles.
Sure. I would like also to add, like, it's not a quick change.
Sorry, Mike, just one second. I just would like to say that I have to go, and I would like to add one question for you to discuss later. Maybe it's a silly question, I don't know, but you can discuss it. Why to end meat consumption instead of changing the production of meat production and the way it is? You know, I don't know if you understood, but later on I can watch it online. So thank you guys. Have a good time and see you another time. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, Bianca. You can watch it later. I just add before that we can go to this half question. I think we need to be realistic, like about it's more individual, the consumption of meat, and it's one by one, and it will affect, if in a long time term, the production of the people in rural areas as well. It will, because some of them or most of them works with meat consumption, and also I think we need to be realistic, like it's a step-by-step process. But what I know, I was reading Cowspiracy. I watched Cowspiracy because Amber shared it, so thank you, Amber. And after I read criticism and I read people that are agreeing with that, and I'm around 2 years vegan now, before Cowspiracy, and it was a choice about being less, reducing my impact in the environment. I have read that Cowspiracy exaggerating in the data of that it's not that much regarding the oil and the production of the petroleum and all that thing, but it's still having a huge impact going to vegan diets. It's not that much, and even some people are argumented with me. I just decided to bring because some people said, "Oh, but it's not that much." But well, we need to do everything that we could, even if it's not that much that it was bringing Cowspiracy. It's still being too much. And what vegan make me change is when I go to a supermarket, I look to everything that I'm buying, and it's not just that I stopped to eat meat. I reduced I'm not eating a lot of industrialized things. I'm moving to a more slow food. I'm cooking much more. I'm changing these apps, and I'm trying to go to buy directly by the local people that are producing that. And all of these things change the way that we think, because we have the idea now that we don't have time to cook. we need to be fast all the time. The food need to be fast. The way that you eat need to be fast. The time that you have to eat need to be fast. And all of these things put us in, it is in our mind, and we need to like detox from them and come back and think in get slower and think about our habits and what we are doing, because the industrialization have a much bigger impact as well, and have a much bigger impact in our health, because it's a lot of salt, a lot of sugar and all that things. So just to bring a little bit more. Ewing, Amber would like to comment? Okay.
I guess I think it's an important personal thing to try and do. How do you make a case for what would you say to your patients or to your community about how they might bring this into their life? Or do you think it's our role to be telling our communities that they should eat less meat and become more conscious of global warming? Or is that something, or do you think it's just personal that only you should do what you should do for your own self?
I don't mind answering that question if it's okay. It was one of the discussions that was brought up in the lecture that I mentioned that I had yesterday as well, because most patients who walk through that I see in general practice won't come and say, oh yeah, I'm really worried about climate change. It's not something that they will consider a medical problem. So I've never brought it up in that setting. What the setting I usually bring it up is when I have family or friends who know that I'm a medical student, who want to know, oh, so what do you think is the healthiest way to eat? And I'll give them my opinion for a number of reasons, but I'll also include sort of environmental reasons as well. But I've never had patients come in asking from that point of view, especially in Wales. There are so many other problems you have to get through before you even get to climate change. Like a lot of the patients smoke, a lot of them are depressed, there's a heavy consumption of alcohol. A lot of them don't exercise, they don't go outside. So if I don't even have the time to go through all of that, much less introduce the whole idea of climate change. And the patients who are concerned about climate change tend to be very anxious patients, and that isn't what I want them to focus on during a consultation. It's more about managing the anxiety, not worrying about everything else. So I don't think that in a GP setting, at least not in Wales, that it would be the best place to bring up that discussion unless you were directly asked about it. I think it would be much easier to do it if I was in a public health position where I was talking to a group of people who were thinking along that way anyway. But I don't know.
Can I add something? Well, one of the things about being vegan, it depends. If it depends the way that you eat. Like I work in a poor setting, and chicken is the most important thing that you can find for people that work in there. Like it's very hard to change, and they will not have that variety of food to eat in the rural area that I'm working. So I need to be realistic. But in other way, I do not address it directly into consultation, but like when I go to a home visit, and then they will offer me milk to me, and then I say no, thank you. Like sometimes like they do, and then they ask why not, and then I will use this time maybe to bring if they ask to me. And one of the things that like we have a huge contact with the community workers that are people that we replicate the things into the community, and then we need to have a meal together every lunchtime. And I think the nice thing is that I start to bring my vegan food, and they are like, oh, are you doing a cake without milk and without eggs and without, and I said, yes, it is possible. And then one of the women bring to me a lettuce as a present, and she said, yesterday I will going to eat, and then I think about it, and I didn't eat meat, and I didn't feel comfortable. So maybe we need to bring it, and no one needs to immediately stop to eat meat. But if you start reducing and start to think about it and bring it in other ways, you can think. But I have the pleasure to be with a patient that was vegan, and it was really interesting. It makes me more close of each other. So I don't know, it's hard. I'm not sure also. We don't have that much articles about vegan, and what I feel is like older doctors don't feel comfortable with these changes. I don't know if you agree with me, but people that are not like, because if you think in vegan diets in a long time term, we didn't have a lot of options and even a lot of people doing that. So I think that we are changing a lot of the society, and people that are older, it's hard to see it, and they are much more conservative and say, no, you maybe we don't should change that much, or maybe it's like they don't feel comfortable with these things yet, Ewing. I think maybe you can bring more insight.
I guess I'm just challenging you to think about how you might produce change, and what you've said, or both said, really is that, you know, your choice is a personal choice, but where people have expressed an interest, you've been able to articulate very valid reasons why you've chosen to do that. And often for doctors working in communities, your opinion is important, and people take note of that. And often, I think for medical students and doctors, particularly in the country, we don't realise what an impact we can have just by our own, how we conduct ourselves can have an effect on our communities, because people do tend to take notice of what the doctor does and says. I guess the real challenge with particular diets is you've got to balance it against what's available in that area or in that community, or what's accessible. One of the major issues, I guess, with particularly poor communities is that they simply can't afford to buy good food, and they end up eating rubbish, fast food, high sugar food, high fat food, because it's cheap and it's available. And I guess that's always going to be one of the major challenges with trying to get people to change the way they eat. But coming back to the premise, that dairy and cattle has a significant contribution to global warming, I think you're right. I think the evidence is very strong that, if we were to change the way our diets, we would make an impact. But often it's going to be a personal choice and setting an example, but also understanding the community in which you live and work, because accessibility, particularly in inland Australia, the cost of fruit and vegetables is quite significantly higher than it is on the coast. So, you simply can't often afford, particularly if you're a low income earner, you simply can't afford to eat good food, and that can be a real challenge. Exactly, they'll have Coke, but they won't have a banana. Yeah.
I just write here into the chat that sometimes people have a land do not have any vegetable into the fridge, but they will have a Coca-Cola, a Coke. So it's something that we need to think about. Like these industries, like they changed the way that we eat. And then now maybe we need to change it back, like to come back into the, because in the past people didn't eat meat every day. It was expensive, so maybe it's time to come back and think about local production and and make it possible, because for some people you need to have that thing, and they even think about a different way to eat. But I'm not sure if we are just talking about this personal choice of eating, but we have a lot of things like that we can bring also. we are now with around 50 minutes. I'm not sure if what I would like to mention also is that I was discussing with one of the indigenous communities and one of their representatives, and they are hugely affected with that because they don't eat that much of meat. They are plant-based. They have plant-based diet, and they are not being able because of the floods to produce it. So they are moving to industrialized things that are cheaper. Because I'm not sure if you know, but in the last years, 70% of our food now is industrialized and it is cheaper. And the price of non-industrialized things like fruits and vegetables grew 40% in the last 10 years. So it's growing a lot of the price, and it's being much harder to eat healthy. And when we think about health promotion, and this means also to promote a better environment, we need to make the easy choice available. The best choice need to be the easy choice. So I think this is the political importance of discussing it and making this possible, this easy choice to be in health and also to impact less the environment. But until the politicians do not move, we need to move individually and discussing it as much as we can in the way that we can do it. I don't know, what do you think? Would you like to?
If I can add something, and to also answer Bianca's question, as you were mentioning, in the past people didn't eat that much meat because it was more expensive. Bianca was asking, why do we have to stop meat consumption instead of changing the way that it's produced? And it's simply because the current demand for meat is so high that if they produced it in a way that was more sustainable, they wouldn't be able to maintain the demand. They wouldn't have a supply that would be able to match the demand. And that would mean selling the meat at a really, really high price, and the companies would then have less profit. So that's why it's sort of easier to get people to cut down on their meat consumption as opposed to changing the way that meat is processed. Because the company that decides to more sustainably make beef, for example, if they decide to do grass-fed beef, let's use that as an example, will sell more expensive beef and have less profit. So in the eyes of a business person, that doesn't make any sense. So why would they keep on doing that? Now, to answer your question about what we can do, it's sort of, I put in the comments, the thing that I forgot to say was that the lecture we had on sustainability and climate change was 2 hours. And the guy who was delivering the lecture spent most of that time trying to convince my classmates that climate change was happening, instead of telling us what we as medical professionals can actually do, which we found a bit frustrating. But we can see where he's coming from, because unfortunately there are still people who don't understand climate change or don't want to understand it. They don't see it as a personal issue. They're sort of part of the middle that aren't affected by it visibly, very visibly. And I think, as you said, the politicians won't move, so we have to do it individually. But I think it has to be the approach that people have taken since I was in high school, was by presenting data, making it scientific, because science is always true. When in the past, actually, science has been misleading. There was a point where scientists said radium was healthy or cigarettes were good for your lungs and things like that. So people don't trust science as much as scientists would like to believe, unfortunately. So I think you do have to make a much more personal approach. And one very simple way that I've done it in the past was when I was in college. We did an experiment using these animals that I can't even remember what they are. They're very tiny, and you can buy their eggs in a store. I think they're sea monkeys. But we kept them under a lamp. So there was 25 degrees, 30 degrees, and 35 degrees. And we measured the rate that they hatched and how many eggs hatched at each temperature. And what we showed is that at 35 degrees, a lot more eggs hatched, and they hatched a lot faster than the ones that were 30 or 25 degrees. But then we increased it up to 40, and less eggs hatched, and the ones that hatched didn't live for very long. That experiment took a few hours, and it proved the point very succinctly. And I think if we took a very simple visual, like ignore the data, just look at what you're doing to this group of organisms, people will understand a lot more easily the effect that they're having, and then you can talk about behavior changes and how it affects you and how it will affect your health, etc., etc. Especially, well, coming from the Caribbean, where natural disasters play such an important part.
Really good, Amber. What I would like to say also, just like we are close to our end, and I think we can, what can we do? Like, we know that the problem is there, and maybe we can complement your class, Amber, and do like some little things. I made some notes, and maybe you can add on it and then do your final comment if you agree. Like, so practically, what can we do? I think we need to think about the individual choice and interpersonal approach regarding the meat consumption and industrialized consumption. I think we need to prepare also the community for natural disasters and prepare them for getting ready for what is coming, for floods, hurricanes, or whatever. I think we need to think about connecting the dots, like, yeah, and make it more visual, making it more like connect the things that's going. Until politicians do not move, we need to move. And I think regarding rural more specifically, we need to know that they will suffer the impact before, as like rural communities where it grows the things, and they will probably suffer. They are now suffering, and they are more remote, and it's harder to things go. So we need to be prepared that we will be dealing with communities that are more directly affected by this change. So this is some practical things that I think about. Maybe you can add and do your final comment.
Thanks very much. Look, I've really enjoyed the time that we've spent together. I think that it's so important that we recognise that we need to call it when we see it and understand that climate change is real. It is happening. And that we need to prepare ourselves, but also our communities, to be responsive to changing economic circumstances, changing food availability, changing the way people may live, particularly if they live in low-lying areas. They may need to think about whether they have to move, how their culture might be affected by climate change, and these are very difficult topics. When you sort of, as a doctor, you also have a role of talking to policy advisors, talking to government, local and federal, and explaining to them what you see in your clinics. It's important to think about how you could keep information, keep data, and start to think about how you can provide evidence for what you're seeing in your clinics and in your communities. And I think this is always a really important thing that we need to understand that we have a role in. So thanks very much, and I've really enjoyed it.
Amber?
I've also enjoyed the discussion as well, and I agree with the point that both of you have said. It's been very interesting, and as Ewan said, we do need to call it when we see it. I think the role of a doctor as an advocate is not something that we use to our full extent, even as a medical student. We do need to sort of, when we feel something is not right, we do need to say something, even if it is something that some people, well, we were told it's considered fluffy as climate change, but it is something that will affect our communities, maybe not in a big dramatic instant effect, but it is something that's going to change the face of our communities over time. And if we plan to work in a community for any length of time, we do need to ensure that they're being taken care of. So I think, if I can add to the list of actions that Mayara has added, I'd also add that we need to be fearless, because it does take a lot of courage to go against what everyone else is ignoring, basically. and say, actually, well, I do care about this, and I think that we can do something about it. So I'm hoping that the people who watch this talk will also be encouraged to not continue to ignore something that's been going on for literally decades and very little has been done about it.
Very well quoted, Amber. And I do my words yours. And I would like to thank you and thank everybody that watched this today. I think it will be a very good one to be online, and the discussions it will be running on Twitter and running on Facebook. And I think discussing it is something that we did before to believe that we have a climate change, and now that we know that it's happening, we need to discuss more what we can do to change it. So I hope we are being the future, and we need to change. So thank you everybody, and see you. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.